Hi everyone and welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I've got a couple red wiggler bins that I want to take care of. At the present time I've got 5 red wiggler bins in total, but as of last feeding I broke the entirety of my red wiggler population into 2 subsections, and the subsection that I want to deal with today is what I'm referring to as the younger group. And then I've got the older group that are probably due for a feeding tomorrow. But today I'm going to take care of feeding the younger ones. And one of them includes a brand new bin, which is only 10 days of age. And even though number 1 indicates the number of feedings, that number 1 is really showing that that's just the food that was placed into the bin when the bin was originally built. So other than the food that was added to the bin when it was originally constructed, this is the first formal feeding, so to speak, of the bin. And that's an interesting one because I finally got around to trying to compost fabrics. So I've got a couple old towels, and one of the things that I added to that new bin when I built it was towels, a couple chunks of towel, as well as another kind of oddball new item which I've never tried composting before, which is pine cones. So a little bit of a treat in there, a couple experimental items. The other bins are pretty routine. This is another fairly young bin. It's less than a month old at this point. It's already received 4 feedings today. It's going to receive its 5th. And the last one that we're feeding today is now still only 51 days of age. Still a fairly young bin. It's received 7 feedings at this point. And this bin right here, the older one of the 3 that we're feeding today, this one has like a variety of different types of worms in it. It's not just red wigglers. It's also got a number of European night crawlers in it, as well as blue worms. And the note that you see here, this whole thing of broken worms, I don't know, I'm not sure exactly what's happening in there. I've been observing chunks of worms broken in half. Some people have suggested protein poisoning. I don't know what's going on in there. So we've been keeping that one on watch. So we'll see how things are progressing in that bin. The food that I've got laid out for them today is it's an assortment of various fruits and veggies. We've got cantaloupe, we've got sweet potato, we've got banana peel, we've got all kinds of other little bits and pieces of Brussels sprouts, you name it. All kinds of goodies in here for them today. As well as a couple other staple items that I usually include with most of my feedings, such as coffee, grit, things like that. So let's get these bins up on the bench and get to feeding them. Alright, so the first one that we're going to begin with is the oldest of the bins, the 51-day-old one, receiving its 8th feeding today. Let's see what we got in here. We've got pretty similar setups in all my bins. In a lot of cases, in most cases, I like to try to use lids that really consist of nothing more than a sheet of plastic like this. So in lieu of a physical container top, I'll just use a plastic covering like that to help prevent moisture from evaporating too quickly out of the bin. This was what worried me the most, was that, coming in here and finding all kinds of worm bit problems. And, right off the bat, you might see it already. I could see 2 pieces of worm right there, obviously not alive. It's just chunks of worm. And here we have a similar situation, and we've even got some mites that seem to be working the problem down. So I think that's one of the main benefits of mites in your bin, is that they're kind of the cleanup crew. If a worm should meet its demise, it usually gets gobbled up by mites within the first, couple days. Within a couple days, you usually have pretty much no sign of any dead worms remaining in your bin, thanks to the cleanup crew. I think I see a little chunk of worm right there too, as well as a few mites surrounding it. So we still got the issue, I believe, but I'm not sure if I'm just arriving in here at sort of a off point, or hopefully maybe the issue is starting to diminish. I haven't done anything specific to try to combat the issue. So it might look a little bit weird. It's just sort of an unusual corner over here that doesn't look like the rest. Over the past couple weeks, I've been trying to get all of my red wiggler bins set up in such a way that we're now employing what's known as a pocket feeding pattern. And if you've been on my channel, at least for the past year or two, you know that I feed down the middle of the bin. I think here we have another just segment of a worm, not an entire worm. Oh, I feel so bad for these little guys. There might even be a couple mites on there starting to dig in. All right, so, well, either way, I don't think the issue is terribly chronic yet at this point. So we're definitely going to continue to keep an eye on the whole worms dying situation. Before we dig in here and make a hole to add today's fresh feeding to, I want to just backtrack a little bit, because this will take us back 1 week when the feeding was last added to this bin. I believe that the prior week there would have been food added over there, and even prior to that, 1 week away, 2 weeks away, approximately 3 weeks away. I'm not always perfectly accurate on feeding weekly every 7 days, but on average it is about 1 week per feeding. So roughly speaking, I believe we can go back at this point 3 weeks worth of activity since an area was last fed. And, you know, we see some bedding bits and, you know, good number of worms and a fair bit of moisture here, which would make sense if this was where a recent feeding had taken place. Here's some additional bits of bedding left over. And I don't really see much. I mean, I do see this banana peel stem. And actually, for 3 weeks, I would expect the banana peel stem not to be broken down this far yet. So I'm sure that this predates 3 weeks ago. This probably ended up in here as part of a recycle of previous feeding materials getting thrown back into the feeding area. Here too, I feel stuff jumbling together, and my guess in most cases is that it's going to be bits of bedding, so I'll usually want to break that stuff up a little bit, as opposed to just leaving it sit there as a chunk. Yeah, so going back a number of weeks, things look pretty nice down the middle of this bin with just very few little scraps. I'm just curious now, since we're sort of on this backtracking time machine sort of thing. I remember when I fed this area, we were using an old piece of avocado that kept coming back, and we just decided that we would not follow each new feeding, and we would just keep it where it had been positioned when it was last fed. Good number of worms surrounding it, and if I remember correctly, yeah, here it is. The pit for that avocado is in here too. In the past, I'd always found this to be more of a haven for mites as opposed to worms. You never see a lot of worm activity. But it doesn't take too long, it seems, for an avocado pit to be soft enough to be broken like that. If you feel one of those things when they're still fresh, they are like a rock. You would not be able to just jam your thumb through it. But that's, you know, that's the breakdown process. It eventually takes down everything. So here's another banana stem. One that's not quite as far along. But, you know, let's press on here. I always can't seem to resist checking to see how things are breaking down in my bins. But before we move on to the new corner, which is going to be over here, this is where we fed last time a week ago. So I wanted to just take a peek in here to see how things are progressing. I feel gooey stuff, which I'm assuming is leftover bits of the food they got last time. The food was wrapped into coffee filters, kind of like these cone-shaped filters, I believe. And just thrown in here as little burritos, little sandwiches. So, you know, what we have here is basically something that is rather gooey in my hands, and it's just a mix of paper, leaves that were thrown on top as bedding. You can see bits of green and yellow and orange, all different kinds of mushy veggies being broken down. There was nothing large or significant worth checking in on in that feeding from what I remember. I think there was a banana peel, and there was this big stem that I remember too. But I don't remember anything else large being thrown into this feeding area. I'm sure I probably had it in my hand already as the banana peel, wherever it is that turned up. It must have just gotten stirred in. Here it is. This is what a banana peel after 1 week would look like. You could see a good number of worms really enjoying that morsel. But I wouldn't give it a whole lot more time. This is the type of feeding that you can expect to see it pretty much all broken down pretty fast without any tougher items in it. And that's kind of like this week's feeding too. All these bits are all things that I would expect not to last more than a couple weeks in a worm bin. So I like the way things are progressing in this container. Whole bunch of busy little worms. So we're gonna open up a little pocket on this edge of the bin now. Keep our pocket location shifting. And we just made the decision early on when we started to do it in a clockwise fashion. So this is just the next position that we're up to now for placing in today's pocket feeding. And even though there's been no fresh food added in here, it seems to be a nice damp and cozy spot that a bunch of worms have decided to call home. And the material surrounding them is all just really beautiful castings. I could barely identify anything else in it other than the little sticks and stems of the leaves. So I believe we're going to allocate, since we've got 3 bins to feed, we'll allocate one of these cone filters to each feeding. Just a little bedding boost besides the food that you're giving them, which is a more nitrogen-rich food item. Doesn't hurt to include a little balance to that in the form of carbon food source. And it isn't much, but it's just a little something. I did actually bring over a stack of these older coffee filters, knowing that I only brought down 3. I figured if I'm going to give each bin my traditional 2 handfuls of food for this week's portion, then I would need 2 filters to nest the food into in each bin. So I've got a couple extra laying around. And you know what? We can also use one as our indicator to show where we last fed. If I remember correctly, this bin didn't even have an indicator to show where it had last been fed. Now, I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I think that paper is not quite as much bedding as we could provide. I think we can definitely provide a little bit more than that. So that's when I like to turn to my big box of crushed leaves. So we'll definitely do what we did with the other feeding area, is cover it up with some nice fresh leaves, but not before we top off the feeding with a little portion of coffee. So I've always got coffee that needs to be composted away. And now that I've processed my big collection of eggshells, we can include grit with today's feeding too. So that looks really nice. At some point soon though, I believe I will stop applying leaves as bedding anymore, because the leaves are great, it's just their sticks. It's their little sticks and stems that I think are just going to take forever to break down if I keep using it. So as time goes on, I might stick to giving them only paper type materials for bedding. But for now, while we're still dealing with fairly young bins, I think we're safe using leaves. There should be time enough for those to get broken down entirely, to coincide with the point where we'll probably just be out of space, and then then we'll be deciding to steer towards harvesting the material out of the bin. So here we go. We're restoring the traditional feeding zone indicator now that it actually has some meaning. In the past, when I knew that I was always feeding each of my bins down the middle, it seemed more of a novelty just to indicate where I had fed, since I think everyone had a pretty good idea of where to look if they wanted to find the previous feeding to check in on it. But now that I'm moving them around, who knows, if I were to lose my orientation, I could always find my way back to see how things are looking in the last feeding area. Or we could just go looking for it manually, but this way we know where it is. These plastic coverings are doing a wonderful job keeping the moisture in the bin. As you saw, the moisture was really nice throughout the bin. If it was too damp, I believe my glove would be a lot dirtier and muddier. But to me, this seems like just about the right level of moisture for a worm bin. All right, let's move on to the second one. Now this one, wow, what a difference, I mean, its weight is so much less than the one we just took care of. And that's the difference between, you know, that was the 8th feeding, this is the 5th feeding. So, you know, when I pulled that one out, it was 7 feedings worth of food having been added, and as opposed to this one having only received 4. So, it's not too surprising that this one is a little bit lighter. And it's a little bit surprising, too, to not find worms out here. I mean, there's clear evidence that they've been here because their castings are tracked around. And it does seem like, for whatever reason, they were focusing their attention to the center of the paper over there. But we're not finding any residents of the paper right now, making it pretty easy just to pull out of here and get out of our way. What a difference. Look at the material in this bin. It's so much more rich in all different types of paper and bedding and carbon rich materials that still need time to break down. So 29 days, 51 days. And they get managed very similarly, so you can really see what that extra time difference makes. So now here too, there was no feeding zone indicator, but if I'm remembering correctly, then each bin that we're dealing with today would have been fed over here in this corner. So I've got a marker here that we can place down after we feed, but that feeding will occur over here. Before we do that though, why don't we take a quick peek? I believe here too, there'll be some sort of a similar pattern. However, on one of them, I really did only start with the pocket feeding approach last week, so there wouldn't have been a previous pocket feeding. But either way, the last feeding would have been in here, and then the one prior to would either be over here or down the middle, but I don't remember at this point. But before we proceed with adding today's food, I always like to see how the most recent feeding is coming along. So this is interesting. I can almost like pick up the entire feeding zone in my hand. And if I just turn it around a little bit, you can see right away it's mobbed with worms. I don't recognize any specific food items in here. I can see the coffee filter in which the food had been placed. Oh, here we have a little something. Definitely making its way to the finish line quickly. A lot of gooiness and maybe some other scraps of veggies. Here's another piece of paper. Something else over here. Some signs of previous food bits. Oh, here's the banana peel. This one would have received a banana peel as well. So here too, it's still clearly identifiable as a banana peel. You can see the worms getting all over different sections of it. The thin skin pieces of it, this stuff won't last more than maybe 2 weeks. The stem might take a month, but the banana peels go pretty quick. All right, so we've always got a good steady supply in these younger bins of material, bedding type materials. I don't remember if this would have been one of the previous feeding zones. There's a few worms in there. Maybe it would have just been in here in the middle. It's hard to say. The moisture feels pretty decent, pretty much anywhere I look in this bin. Again, I attribute that ability to hang on to its moisture to that plastic sheet of plastic bag basically covering things. But it wouldn't make much difference what kind of plastic you're using, as long as it's able to keep the moisture in. It's hard to say. I can't tell if the previous feeding in this bin was down the middle or that other corner. But either way, we're just going to get this bin signed on with this newest feeding approach. This I remember though from last feeding, this entire edge of the bin being a little bit drier than what I observed elsewhere in the bin. Maybe because foods have been working their way over in this side, but for whatever reason it did seem like this edge is a little bit drier than it needs to be. So I'm glad that we're feeding on this edge. I'm not going to try to do anything to remedy that situation. It's just an observation. It's not like the diagnosis of a problem. I'm not seeing it as a problem. Just an observation that things are a little bit drier out here. Last week too, I had to kind of walk myself off of reacting to that and doing something about it. I just left it the way it was and added today's food with the confidence that the food I'm adding is going to bring with it a good amount of moisture that should solve things pretty quickly in the next day or two. Even though I'm not in here to observe the correction occurring, I believe I could be fairly confident that all this stuff, all this frozen material here, all this melon, stuff's going to kick off so much moisture, and with it being delicious food items too, it's going to attract a good amount of worm activity coming in here to take advantage of tasty morsels. So I got a feeling the next time we check in here, we're going to have a pretty good moisture level in this section of the bin. Hopefully. Either way, that would be the next place we feed over there. So it would be getting a lot more attention in a fairly short period of time. Won't take long. Alright, what do we got left here? I think I got some coffee we can give these guys too, but we'll save some for the last bin. I think we've got some left. And in here, I think we're pretty much red wigglers only. Maybe not as high a population. I can't remember. But either way, I think what we saw looked pretty promising. I like the way things look. Here, you know, I'm questioning whether we need to add any more bedding than what we already included with those couple pieces of paper that we nested the food in. But you know what the heck. New bins can handle it. I always feel like I'm a little bit stingy on the bedding, and I should really try to do something about that. And once in a while, I just need to remind myself to go ahead, add bedding. Never be causing any problem by adding what appears to be more bedding. All right, what's this? Here we go. I guess we did have a feeding zone indicator. I thought we didn't, but whatever. We can have two. In fact, the old one, since it's got a big hole in it, why don't we just include that as bedding too? Right down here in the feeding area. I think by placing it in there like that, it's going to get a good amount of attention. I'm not worrying even about putting this leafy matter in dry the way it is. I think there's enough moisture coming in with this food that it's going to take care of dampening all those leaves that surround it, no problem. So I look forward to seeing how things progress in here next time we pop in. Maybe next time we'll just have to be more careful to see if the feeding zone indicator has stuck to the newspaper covering. Unless I can have it sticking out, make it really clearly obvious that there's already one there. That'll help us find it next time. Alright, things look really nice in here too. Can't complain so far. Okay, moving on. Wow, here too, this is always unusual too. When I take one of my larger size containers, this is one of my larger size bins, and I go to pick it up, but when it's only a week old or 10 days old like this bin is, it's still extremely light. Here too, in that case I was using a piece of bubble wrap, whatever piece of plastic was around. It's actually complementing the piece of plastic that's already attached to this cardboard here, so I made sort of a little piece of equipment here that combines two things that are usually separate in a lot of cases. It just combines this cardboard covering with the plastic wrap, making them into one thing. Here, as you can see, you know, I can handle the plastic covering without it flopping around and shaking off a bunch of castings, making a mess. It feels like I can just manage it so much more neatly because it's you know, held by the cardboard that it's attached to. So it's just kind of a little experimental thing that I have going on here. These little guys, some of them don't look too good. I don't even know if they're still kicking, but I'm not going to evict these guys. I'll just fold the paper in half and let them stay on it. The paper's nice and damp. They should be comfortable inside the paper. They should feel themselves pretty comfortable inside there with the darkness that the folded over paper causes. What nice moisture levels. Look at that nice dark. I don't know why, but for some reason a dark worm to me looks so much healthier than a pale one, like this guy here. Like he's anemic or something. I don't know. Oh wow, look at that. Some of these sticks are so huge. But by being exposed to the dampness, even the thicker ones are just, you know, really soft. So they're getting there. But for a 10-day-old bin, this is pretty much still just consisting of what the bin was built with. as well as maybe some of this material we're seeing here on top might have even just come over with the worms when they were placed in here. So I wouldn't really consider this over here as like a hot spot for composting yet. The compost we're seeing is really just stuff that was added after the bin was built. I think if we wanted to see how things are progressing out here on the edges, where we would just, you know, dig down through some of the bedding on the surface and find more bedding. So now here, no pocket feedings applied yet. So we'll put the pocket feeding into this corner like we've been doing in all the other bins, and we'll label it with a feeding zone indicator. Before we get in there though, why don't we just inspect how this new bin is progressing. There's not going to be any one spot where the food could be found, like in most of my cases. In most of my cases, I'm opening up the bin, feeding in a very specific spot, and then even, you know, indicating to myself where that was, so I could find my way back there pretty easily. But look at that. What a huge mound of worms. Really, I guess, zeroing in on some sort of a some piece of food that was either in here or might still even be in here. Because I don't see any food, but just a huge mound of worms. Let's cover them up, let them continue what they were doing. So maybe there's other examples of, you know, worms mounded up elsewhere in this bin. Kind of getting the whole process started everywhere, not focusing the activity in the bin to any one particular spot. Here things are a little bit dry, but not terribly. Here too, a lot of cardboard. Oh, here we go. I guess besides a towel, we also had some other larger, challenging pieces of cardboard and bedding and stuff placed in here too. So here's some coffee filters. Here's some pieces of egg carton. And down here now we can actually see chunks of the towel that was put in here. So, you know, it's all bedding. I'm treating the cotton, you know, the towel as bedding too. And I look forward to seeing where things progress in this bin. So let's start opening up a spot where we can add today's feeding. If we're lucky, we'll bump into another older food item in here that we can check out, or another piece of egg carton. In this case, it's 6 sections, not just 4 like the last one was. Other pieces of cardboard and paper and bedding materials, as well as more of that towel. This one I can't pull out. It seems to be part of a longer strip. So here we'll finally get a chance to see how things progress once you get some food laid in there. And here's one of the pine cones too. Maybe I'll stick it right in there, right into the middle of the action, so it gets the attention it deserves. So I think we'll just pile the food right on top of all of that stuff. And at this point, I think we could just dump out what remains, make sure we get every little scrap. Oh, it all came out so nicely. I was expecting some of it to stick. So much frost in here too, you can see this stuff is just going to turn to water instantly. And then over time, the rest of it, as it thaws out, will generate moisture. As it starts getting broken down and decomposing, it'll generate moisture. I got a feeling things are going to be really nice over here in this corner next time we pop in. So let's see, what else do we need before we can call this a day? This is kind of interesting to see worm bins at their various stages, right? Starting from a bin that's a good month and a half, if not older, in age, all the way down to one that's still just getting its first feeding. Pretty cool to see. And it's even cooler when you can, you know, anticipate that, hey, within 50 days, if I got, you know, a container full of castings like that, I can already maybe be tapping into that supply to build up some potting mix, or, you know, start to get my seed starting mix going, since it's, you know, January, almost February now. It might be time to start tapping into our compost supplies so we can get our seeds sown and get the growing season for 2021 started. So what else? Should we do the same here? Why not? I like consistency. Except here in this bin, it's going to be harder and harder now to see where that last feeding was, because all this leafy stuff blends in with everything else in the bin. So we'll do ourselves a favor. help ourselves find our way back, just like Hansel and Gretel, right? To the feeding zone. So that was fun. So after, oh, here's our little worm friends. I forgot about them. Why don't we point them down? Give them a slightly more cozy spot. And here's a couple more. Get rid of these little guys too. Drop them down. So that's all there is for today. Let's get this thing covered up and put away. And tomorrow, I guess I'll take care of the rest of the red wigglers. I'll feed my 2 older ones now that I got the 3 youngest ones here fed. So this is what I was referring to earlier as far as having one kind of complement the other. I've been doing this in other bins too, where one piece of plastic takes care of 2 of the 4 walls by being nudged into one corner, and the other plastic takes care of the other 2 walls by being nudged into the opposite corner. So I think this has been helping a little bit. In the past, I'd always found the edges to be really dry and barren of any activity because of the dryness. So this seems to just keep moisture pretty well balanced throughout the entirety of the bin. All right, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please remember to leave me a thumbs up. That's always really appreciated. If you haven't done so already, also consider subscribing to the channel too. That would be really appreciated as well. All right, everyone. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.